How hard is it to propagate your own plants? Today I'm going to show you how to propagate plants from cuttings. G'day there, I'm Dana from Pewakaka Valley Homestead. Today I have a whole bucket of cuttings that I have taken from my parents' place, and I'm about to harvest a few from around here as well, that I want to give a go at propagating them from cuttings. So I'll show you the basic principles of how to propagate new stuff from cuttings, and then we'll get all these things in the pots and we'll see how many of them take. I know some definitely will, and others it is a little bit of a gamble as to whether they will or not, but I'm going to give it a try. So here's my big bucket. I cut all these late last night and they've just been sitting in a bucket of water. We're just going to go and get a few more cuttings from a few plants that I want from around here as well. One thing you will need is a good sharp pair of secateurs, which I've given a wee bit of a clean, and you want them to give a nice clean cut. Now this is a forsythia that is currently dormant, and I'm going to be grabbing some pieces off of it. What you're wanting to look for is last season's growth that's nice and thick. So this is last season's growth here. The wood's still kind of shiny, but it's hardened up. This is the season before's growth. It's looking a little more grey. So we're going to go for this slightly newer growth, and I'm just going to harvest a bunch of these. And the other thing I want to harvest is a prunus. It's one of the flowering, I think it's a flowering plum, I think, that I've got in the front driveway, and it makes the most beautiful pink blossoms. And I've actually also got a green gage tree that I want to try as well. Alright, we'll take these down and I'll show you what medium I'm going to put them into. This is the mix I have made for growing on these cuttings. It is a mixture of propagation sand, some vermiculite, some pumice, and a tiny little bit of some peat. What you're really aiming for is something that drains really, really well. You're going to be watering these every day anyway, to keep them in a nice, moist, humid environment. And if they don't drain well, you'll find that the ends of the sticks start to rot and your grafts just won't take. So I just use these 4-inch or 10cm pots and fill those up. So as well as your plants and your secateurs, you're also ideally going to have some rooting hormone. This is just a powdered one that I use. And you can tip that into a separate container. I don't bother, I just sit it there. Now, if this is the forsythia, I'm going to pull, it's got a few wee seed heads on the end of it. There, so you're aiming for wood that's preferably about as thick as a pencil, but is still last year's growth, and some plants just don't do that. So you do your best with what you can find. They're not my sharp scissors, where are they? And with a pair of sharp secateurs, you want to cut on a wee bit of an angle at the bottom and remove any leaves or buds in that lower few inches, leaving some buds at the top. And then all you need to do is dip that new end into some rooting hormone and then pop it into your, as you make a wee bit of a hole first, pop it into your mix so that it's at least 2 inches or 5 centimeters deep. Now the good thing is you don't need one plant per pot. You can actually do multiple plants all in the same pot, because once they've got roots you're going to be taking them out and potting them on anyway, and this saves a lot of space. It saves on labelling them and saves with watering, all sorts of things, because when they've just grown a couple of roots they're not going to get root bound in a small pot like this with a lot of them in there. So you can just make them all sheer. Now each of these nodes where these leaves come out are all places that the roots could potentially grow. So that's why it's quite good to put them in nice and deep. The reason I make a hole first is so that all the rooting hormone compound doesn't all just brush off when you first start sticking it in. I did this with my forsythia last year and got quite a few really good plants out of it. Pretty much every single one of the bits of wood that I put in actually grew a plant, which was great, but then a whole lot of them were killed off by some rubbish potting mix that I had that obviously didn't have enough nutrients in it for what they needed. Now one thing I didn't know when I first started propagating plants, so I'm going to tell you because you might not know either. When they say to cut the end, put it in some rooting hormone, pop it into some sand, they don't actually mean sand out of the sandpit from the beach. What they actually mean is sharp sand or builder's sand, or these days you can buy propagation sand from most nurseries will sell propagation sand. And what they actually mean is some very fine gravel. Now what cuttings need to propagate their roots is free draining soil, enough moisture to keep them alive in the meantime, and some heat. Some plants will propagate better in the summer, some propagate better in the winter. I usually do all of mine in the winter pretty much, because I have a heated propagation bench that I will show you shortly that I put everything in. And the other thing they're going to need is plenty of humidity. So you can pop a plastic bag over the top. You can put the whole thing into like a plastic tote that you've drilled a few ventilation holes into. The idea is just to keep it plenty humid so that the plants don't dry out without having such poor airflow that it goes mouldy or rotten. So, and the last thing you need to do is label that, because you'll be amazed at how similar all the plants look once they're all just sticks. And I'm just going to set it aside and do the same thing with a few other plants. Now, I have got another plant down here which is a perennial kale. And as you can see, it's really green. So I don't put this into the same propagation sand. I tend to just stick this straight into some compost. And to get a good shoot for this to grow, these grow really, really easily. Just rip most of the leaves off that big leaf. I'm just going to snip up there. So you end up with something that looks like this. Now these actually root really well. I don't even bother with the rooting hormone with them. And I just put them straight into some compost. So I just pop it in nice and deep into some compost and keep it nice and moist, and it will just grow roots and grow a new plant really quickly. So I'm going to multiply a few of these as well. The best bits to use off of a perennial kale like this are the freshest, newest shoots. So you want these nice young ones. And just tamp the soil around to make sure it's up against the stem. The roots won't form in an air pocket. The other thing I found with these kale plants is that the rats really like them. I ended up having to put them into a bag, a mesh bag, to keep the rats away from them last year. And once these show signs of new growth, it's a good time to pot them up into their own potting mix. They've become their own little plants. And the roots on the end of them you won't necessarily see to start with. Sometimes roots are really small, but it's enough for the plant to consider it viable, and it will just start growing new leaves. You can see here on this bit where it's broken, it's growing new roots already all by itself. That's just been sitting out in the air. Might put that one in its own pot. Rosemary's another really easy one to propagate. Just cut sort of 4-inch pieces of sort of the more woody but last year's growth. Rip the sticks off. You don't even need rooting hormone for this. You can just stick it straight in the ground and it will start to grow. You can do the exact same thing with lavender plants as well. The really bendy tips, you may as well just use those in your dinner. But these stalky bits will grow roots really easily. And you can see very quickly how you can propagate a whole lot of plants for free from either plants you've got of your own or someone else's garden that you can go and raid. We'll do a follow-up video later with all these plants and you'll be able to see which ones have taken and which ones haven't. But I'm banking on most of those rosemaries taking quite easily. And this is a cute little lavender plant that I've got that has really pretty flowers that I'm going to do something similar with. Just trim the excess off the bottom stalk. I am going to dip that one in some rooting hormone though. And then pop it into the mixture. Firm it down around the bottoms. With these sorts of plants you can cut all this, the really soft greenery, the green little stalks off. They're just going to lose lots of moisture. And the plant will only need a few little leaves. I'll get rid of that old flower bud as well. It only needs a few little leaves there to get growing. In fact, I'll take some off that as well. I didn't realise there were quite so many soft ones in there. You'll just get better strike rate if the plant doesn't dehydrate before it gets to send out its roots. If you find any stems that have got flowers or flower buds on them, like fresh ones, pull those off as well because you want the plant to be focusing on making roots, not on making flowers. So I'm going to get on and pot up the rest of all of these plants, and I'll show you what we're going to do once we've got them all potted up. I just want to say, when you're trimming a branch to take a cutting from a tree, you want to look at these nodes and do an angle cut right at the bottom of one of those nodes. That node and the surrounding area is where the most amount of hormones are that will naturally tend to send out roots. You can also sort of damage the bark around the same sort of area to encourage root growth to happen. And the more you cut that on an angle, the more surface area there will be to probably grow roots as well. And then at the top end, you want to be cutting just above a leaf node. Leave about 1 centimetre or half an inch above another node before you cut that as well. That means if the top dries out, it's not going to dry out down to this, where this leaf is. So you just find a leaf node, cut right at the bottom of it. Find another leaf node about 4 inches up, It's long enough for cutting, and cut on a slight angle, just about a centimetre above the last leaf node. And when you're pushing them down into the soil, don't push them right down to the bottom. You want to leave them floating sort of about an inch, sort of about here is where you want the bottom to be, just sort of about an inch up from the bottom. And that'll leave some room for the roots to grow without busting out the bottom of the container. I'm going to show you how to take some cuttings from this rhododendron. These rhodies are really helpful. Their freshest growth is bright green. What we're going for is the slightly browner stuff at the bottom. So I cut the bright green stuff off. Anything with these massive leaves you can cut right down, because they will just lose hydration. And then you need to find one of these nodes where another branch can come out, and you just cut on an angle below there. Dip it in some rooting hormone, and for these I've given them a much bigger pot because they're much bigger plants. Tamp them down, give them a label. Alright, I have potted up all the plants that I think I want for now, and I'm going to move them all through into the tunnel house, which is where I've got a heated propagation table. I have got some instructions on how to build one of those of your own. I'll put the link to that down below, and we'll move all these through, and we'll have a wee chat about that too. This is my tunnel house, and during the summer it grows tomatoes and peppers, and during the winter it grows vegetables, and we do a lot of propagation in here. Soon I plan... spider web in my mouth. Soon we plan to get our tomatoes and peppers started for next season. You can see here, this is my big cherry tomato, which, despite it being the very beginning of July, is actually still putting out the odd tomato. I do need to get out here and probably just rip it out and harvest the very last of the tomatoes. Down here you can see we've got some lettuce, some spinach, some beets, we've got silver beet, chard, whatever you want to call it, and a whole lot of broccoli, and then we've got a few peas, and I've got some coriander, cilantro, whatever you want to call it, sown in here as well that just haven't come up yet. So at this end of the tunnel house, this is my propagation area. The two biggest killers of new cuttings is dehydration and rot. And unfortunately, trying to balance the two is really difficult. You need enough moisture in there that the plant doesn't dehydrate because it will die. And you need enough airflow through there and enough drainage that the plant doesn't rot out at the bottom. Last season I followed some instructions from somebody else who said you can actually just put all your cuttings straight into compost and you'll get really good success. And actually I didn't have great success with a lot of them. A lot of them did. They took off, they looked like they were doing really well, and then they succumbed to rot because the compost just holds on to too much moisture and it didn't drain well enough for what I needed. So this year, this is the mix that I have used. It has got a little bit of peat in it just to help with that moisture retention, but other than that it's stuff called propagation gravel, I think was what they called it. Propagation gravel, I think, rather than propagation sand, but anyway, and it's got a little bit of vermiculite and a little bit of pumice as well, and so it's a really light, airy, quite stony mixture that's draining really well. So to keep up the moisture, this is my propagation bed. You can see here it's got gravel. This helps retain the heat, and you can see the heating wires down here, they should actually all be covered up. I just uncovered them to show you how they look, and so they radiate heat through these stones. It's got down here, this is the control unit. It's reading 17 degrees Celsius at the moment. I'm aiming for above 15, hopefully closer to 20. And it has, this is the temperature thing that attaches to it. So it depends what exactly, if you want the soil temperature to be 10 degrees, you can chuck it in the soil. Whoop! If you want the soil temperature to be 10 degrees, you can chuck it into the soil and set it to 10 degrees, or for me, I just sit it in the top of the gravel and set it to 30 degrees Celsius, which allows plenty of leeway. I think it's got a 10 degrees one way or the other thing on it. So I just sit it in the top of the gravel like that, and so that heats this whole bed up. This is also the same place I get my tomatoes. I've got a space down here that I'll put my tomatoes and peppers, get them started in there. These are some seeds that I had put in last year that just did nothing, so I thought I'll put them in there because I'm going to be watering these plants quite regularly, so I'll put them in here and see if any of them take off. They're all ones that are a little bit harder to grow, not your bog standard veggies, so I thought I'll see if any of them come away with the extra heat and moisture. So this has got, these are just plastic hose hoops held with hose clamps down the bottom, a bit of baling twine along the top to add some tension, and then just some clear plastic that pulls over, and that helps hold the humidity in. The whole tray is lined with this black plastic, which of course folds down over the electric system so that none of that gets wet. And it helps hold the moisture in there as well. There is a drainage hole right in that back corner, and thankfully when it decided to slowly but surely sink into the dirt, it's angled itself towards that back corner anyway, so it's not like the whole table is going to be full with water. It gets damp and then it drains. So the plan of attack with these plants is to water them each day, if not every other day, just to keep them nice and moist, to keep an eye on the temperature to make sure that it's staying nice and warm. We are getting some frost now, but being within the heated table within the tunnel house, they should be perfectly fine. And then of course to those roasters, and then of course to keep an eye out for fresh growth. Now you'll see at this end there's actually an opening. This is to help with airflow. It's not a mistake, it's actually on purpose, just to help with airflow. And the same thing happens at the other end. And see here, you can see the condensation's already building up on it, so it'll be nice and humid in there, which will stop these green leaves from dehydrating. Some plants are incredibly easy to propagate, currants being one of them. So I've got these spare sticks here that I haven't actually put into the propagation table, so I'm going to go and put them straight in the ground up in the food forest. All you have to do to propagate new currant bushes is to grab the sticks and put them in the ground. Make sure that they're fresh growth, kind of newer growth's better than older growth, and then just push them into the ground about 10 centimetres or 4 inches deep, and let nature do the rest. I hope you found that video on propagation useful. If you have, please hit the like button. You can share it with anyone else that you think might find it useful. And consider subscribing to our channel. We bring you videos twice a week on growing and preserving your own food, as well as other homesteading bits and pieces. We'll see you in the next one.